technical seminars are an Intertech production. For instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.
Doing this really simply, here's an example of sorting something using a collator. I use a static method to get an instance of the collator, passing in the locale object that I want to use. Once I have that collator, I set the strength. In this case, I'm setting it to its most restrictive, so identical. And then I sort. And to do that, here I'm just using the regular collections.sort. I'm passing in a customer list, but now I'm also passing my collator object, so it can use that and sort it in a locale-specific manner. Some other considerations, GUI. We have to think about our interface when we are going to be dealing with an internationalized application. Layout. Different regions are going to expect information to flow in different directions. For example, in Hebrew, this is a language that's written right to left. So sometimes where we expect something to be on the left side, it may make more sense for another region to have that on the right side. So you'll want to consider how that layout is affected depending on the locale. Menu items are another thing that may need to flow in a different direction as well, depending on how the language is written, especially if the language is written from top to bottom instead of left to right, for example. I already mentioned a little bit about localized images. Again, if the images contain text, that's probably going to be a real obvious case where you'll want to at least consider swapping it out so that the text is written in the language of the region that you're supporting. And also just the context of the images. As I mentioned, some images and colors do have specific meanings in different regions, and ignoring these issues can cause confusions at best, and at worst possibly be insulting. Character expansion and contraction. This is a little different than what I was referring to in terms of the collator, but it actually can have the same effect. This is more where I have a phrase that maybe in English, let's say it's a 4-letter or 5-letter word, and in another language it becomes a 12-letter word. Clearly that's going to take up more real estate on the screen. That may be fine, but maybe you're using a dynamically sized table, and that's going to push out your table in a way that maybe you didn't expect. So these are things that you need to think about when you're internationalizing your application. The other thing that you're going to need to do is consider the character set that you're going to be using. I'm just going to give you a real simple rule of thumb. There's other things you can do for more specific issues, but in general, what we're going to want to do is move away from the 7 and 8-bit ASCII and Latin 1 character sets. So what is a code set and how does it differ from the encoding? A code set is just a unique code that represents a unique character. It's that simple. So in ASCII, it's a 7-bit code that represents a possible 128 characters. What we typically see in the web on English websites is ISO 8859-1. This is an 8-bit code set, so it represents 256 characters. It's also known as Latin 1. It's also backwards compatible with ASCII. So sometimes people say, hey, this is written in ASCII, and actually the code set that's being used is ISO 8859-1, and that's just because the first 128 characters are exactly the same as the ASCII code set. But what we're going to want to do in order to support characters and languages that may not be contained in the Latin 1 character set is use Unicode. And Unicode is a 16-bit code set, character set, and as of version 2.0, it's able to contain over 1 million code points. Encoding is a little different than a code set. So when we're transmitting our code sets across the wire or through applications, we do it through octets. And the octet can mean something to say what code it represents. So the encoding usually is in two different ways, modal or non-modal. So a modal can have escape characters, and what that means is, let's say I'm dealing with a language that has some characters are 1 byte, some characters are 3 bytes or 2 bytes. How do I know when I'm reading this if the byte I'm reading is for a single character or if I need to read 2 bytes for the character? So what they do is, in a modal encoding, they'll use escape characters. It'll say, hey, everything that follows this escape character is going to be 2 bytes. Every 2 bytes is a character, represents a code point. Now I'll escape it again, and I'll say every character that follows is just 1 byte. And you just keep doing that, or excuse me, the encoding keeps doing that, so that the language can be translated properly. The non-modal versions are just where a set of bytes are specified, like this. If the byte falls within such and such range, then it's going to be 1 byte per character. If it's within another range, then it's going to be 2 bytes per character. So that's non-modal. The encoding that you typically see for internationalized applications is UTF-8. So UTF-8 is the encoding. Unicode is the code set that it's encoding. You're going to need to set this in your servlets and your JSPs for web applications. So a couple of examples of looking at that. In my JSP, in my servlet, I can use the response object, the set character encoding, and I can pass in UTF-8. Otherwise, I can combine it with the content type. I can set that content type to be text/HTML. Semicolon char set equals UTF-8. In my JSPs, I use a directive for the page. The attribute is page encoding, and again, the value would be UTF-8. Now, that's going to be setting the encoding of our application when we're using the web and the browser receives the information, so it knows how to translate that what it's encoded into a code point, a specific code point for the language. In this case, Unicode. There's another kind of encoding that can happen, and that's, for example, the encoding of the actual files that we're saving. So we looked at resource bundles, and one of the things we could do were name value pairs in our property files. When you save that page has an encoding as well. So I'm going to show you an example here of a Japanese file that I created, and we'll see what kind of issues that you run into there. All right, so to take a look at the encoding issue that I just mentioned, let's jump back to our property files. And as a quick side note, what you're seeing here is a property file that's for the Japanese language. Now, I used Google Translator to look up username and password and get their Japanese strings. If this is wrong, I apologize in advance. I'm not really sure what it says since I don't actually speak Japanese. But the issue that I want to demonstrate here is what happens when I have a file that's not encoded in 8859-1 encoding and instead is encoded in UTF-8. So my property file here is using these Japanese characters, which are definitely not part of the Latin 1 character set or the ASCII character set. So I save this file as UTF-8. And now when I run my program, let's say I pass in a Japanese locale, you would expect that it finds the file, but when it tries to read it, it's not able to do it. It's just it reports a missing resource exception for Japanese, even though it's clearly there. And that's because when the file is read in, sort of with the resource bundle out-of-the-box functionality, by default it's going to look for an 8859-1 file, and it won't be able to translate this properly if it's been in UTF-8. So there is a tool that's provided for us, and this is part of the JDK. It's just located in your JDK's bin directory, and it's called native to ASCII. So what I'm able to do is simply run this, what you see here, native to ASCII. I specify the encoding of the file, of that property file, and then I specify the name of the file that I want to translate into ASCII and the name of the file I want to change it into. So in this case, I've got a property file example that was Japanese. I just change the extension so it would be a little different, and then I run this program and it generates property file example _ja.properties. So if I go and open up what it creates, looks like this.
For more free learning resources and to see the latest lineup of our instructor-led .NET, Java, and XML courses, visit us at www.intertech.com.